Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Living Out Love LOL podcast. And this is our third episode where we're really going to get into the umbrella of how to love people to think differently than us. We already did the religion. We already did the politics, which was...
We already did religion. When was that? Did you guys do an episode without me?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
What the heck?
You didn't tell him?
I
meant we didn't do religion. Rick, you didn't miss anything. Okay. Today, we are going to talk about people with different belief systems. Mm. We don't like using the term religion. We're just going to say different belief systems because it's way bigger than that.
Especially now. There's many belief systems.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to start with a question for you guys that's kind of been getting to me a little bit. And how do you love people with different belief systems?
Yeah, I know. I grew up in a Christian household, so I don't remember a time where I didn't know who Jesus was. I don't, so I don't have a perspective of experiencing other belief systems. It's always been Christianity, for me. But as I got older, I realized, oh wait, not everybody believes the same things that I do, and not everybody thinks the same way that I do. So I know early on, I was probably, I'm trying to think of the term for it. I was very arrogant about it. I felt like that I was right and that they were wrong and that they were idiots for the way that they thought. I really thought that when I was in my 20s and stuff. How could somebody not believe in Jesus? That's I've listened to the stories of the other guys. How could you And so it wasn't until I actually started to meet people that honestly believed those things, and then why they believed it, before I started to kind of see it. So I know that the challenge for me for a really long time was the fact that I just, my position was always that I was right and everybody else was wrong. Mm-hmm. And so anytime there was a conversation about it or it came up in conversation, I communicated that and how I talked about people and how I talked about their beliefs. And a lot of times it was even, just dismissive, well, you don't know what you're talking about, right? Yeah. And so, that's very, very far from what Jesus did, let alone the people that came after him. Look at Paul. Paul was he was the missionary's missionary, right? He went everywhere and talked to every culture, and those people had belief systems that were, wild belief systems, but he spoke to them in a way that he could engage them and not step on their toes at the beginning. Eventually he was to a place where he was okay guys, well here's truth. Here's what truth looks like. Yeah. But it didn't come at the cost of, hey idiots, what are you doing worshiping a ball? That doesn't make any sense. Or right. This, whatever over here that you're worshiping, that's not what it's about. It's about my God, and my God's right and your God's wrong.
He comes on speaking their language, essentially, right? When he goes to speak with men of philosophy, he's studied philosophy. He knows what's going on, and he's not discounting it either. One of my favorite things, as someone who studied some philosophy in college, is St. Augustine said that if it is true, it is from God. And Paul kind of took that concept pretty early on and was listen, you all have this saying. Yeah, you're not wrong. I would like to also add this onto it. Yep. Have you heard of Jesus? No? Let me tell you about him. But it was in a way where he met them where they were, using the language that they already knew and the concepts that they already knew.
There were cultures of people he would go to, and when he would talk to them, he wouldn't even mention Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
He would, eventually he would, but it wasn't the first thing he said. I think that we get this idea about preaching the word to people that makes it seem like it's a fight. Where we go in guns a-blazing, I stand on the truth of the word of God and you better bow before this because my God, and that's kind of the picture that we get in scripture, but really that's not what happened. And going back to Paul, Paul very much was hey, I want to understand where you're coming from. I know in my heart that Jesus is real because I've experienced him. Yeah. I want to share that with you. But if I come in and say, hey, idiots, you don't know what you're talking about, let me tell you about my God, then that isn't what's going to get people to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see, I think your growing up and background was very different than mine. I grew up in a household where my parents would just drop me off to church. So it was like an hour babysitting. They never went to church. I approached my mom like, why aren't you guys going to church? And the answer was, well, we got you in the Catholic Church so you can get your sacraments, so that when you get married, you have the option of getting married in a Catholic church. So it was never even about a relationship with God.
Man, they were like very forward thinking with that.
We
Like,
got a plan.
It's like, but Mom, I'm 7. We have a plan for you. You never know when you're going to need a Catholic church.
Yeah. So mine wasn't about relationships. So because of that, once I got my confirmation, I was free to make a decision to go to church or not. Well, they never went to church, so I made that decision. I'm not
Why
going
would
to church.
you? Yeah.
So I was away from the church probably from confirmation at 14 till 34. And then I just knew something was missing in my life. I had always talked to God, just me and him throughout those years, but I never really had a true intimate relationship, I would say. More of a just talk to him when I needed him, right?
Yeah.
And so growing up in that atmosphere, I was probably a little more liberal to other religions. You know, like when my buddy would tell me, well, I'm an atheist, I really... I was okay with it. I didn't really try to get into it because I didn't even know where I stood.
Sure.
So how was I to give ministry or use that opportunity for to help build his relationship with Christ? So it was interesting growing up on the other side, and it did make me open to listening to other people and their religions. Not that I'm saying they were right or wrong. Obviously, in my heart, we believe in God and we believe what Jesus did for us, right? But I think it's interesting that your background does affect how you handle those situations. So my tool, I would say, was not really judging, because I didn't know where I stood, so I couldn't really evaluate what their religion was or what they thought, which made it easier in a way.
I think I probably relate more to how you grew up, Rick. My parents were pastors and missionaries before I was born, so I like to tell people that I'm a pastor's kid and missionary's kid, but have never actually been either. But my parents met when my dad was pastoring at a church, and then they moved overseas to be missionaries. So that's just the culture I grew up in, and by the grace of God, I have mellowed a lot in my old age of 26.
Man, you
So,
pretty much live your life.
I know,
It's
but
all
compared
downhill
to
from
where
here.
I was, because I would have landed in that camp of like, listen, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're stupid. And I think somewhere in my senior year of high school, I was having, through a series of events, we weren't attending a church regularly. We were kind of church hunting, and I was responsible for a lot of my own spiritual development. And I think what's so interesting is that as I was doing my own reading and my own research, I kind of started being a little more, again, like you said, not necessarily open to other things being right, but a little more compassionate, maybe. Because at 16, 17, I'm realizing like, oh, this is hard. And I even have a good foundation for it and really supportive parents. And if you don't have that, or if you didn't grow up in that, like I started having a lot more compassion and empathy for people who don't have a Christian faith. And then even in the last 2 years, I have more than a handful of friends who have kind of walked away from the church and walked away from Christianity because of how churches and Christians responded during the pandemic. And so it has gone from, almost all of my friends are Christians, to now, no, quite a good number of them aren't, but they are still very close people and very close friends.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's tough, right? Like, I was, there's so many different conversations you can have with people, like Christ-centered conversations. And, the majority of people that I have talked to that have either not been interested in like going further, like learning more about Christianity, or have walked away from the faith, has nothing to do with the nuts and bolts of Christianity. It's not like, well, I can't believe that God created the earth in 7 days. Or like, I don't know that a man died and rose from the dead. Like, those aren't the hills that they can't overcome. It's like, man, like, Christians just treat me so poorly.
Yeah.
And so if our goal, if our purpose here on earth is to share the love of Christ with others, right? Like if we, Great Commission, Jesus said, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in my name. If we're going to do that, then we have to approach it in a way that isn't like off-putting. And I'm not saying, Sarah, I love something that you said, that you were looking, but your mind wasn't changing about it. You were just understanding more about it.
Yeah.
And then you use the word compassion. And honestly, like, we talk about tools and everything throughout these, I have a feeling that the tool of compassion is probably going to come up more than others, if not every time that we talk about this. Because
Absolutely.
Compassion is that tool that isn't a go-to for us normally, right? Because our pride and our ego is always like trying to like assert itself into well, no, I'm right and this is what I am. Compassion is in complete opposition to pride and ego, because compassion is like, you know what? I want to feel where you're at. I want to understand where you're coming from. And I think that we have to be able to do that. We have to. And listen, if we're not a compassion, like I've heard people be like, well, I'm just not really that compassionate. It's like, okay, well, it's not a definitive thing. Like,
right.
You're not. It's
Actually,
not like, well,
you should.
I'm not 6'3", so I
That's
can't
it.
dunk. Like,
Right.
I don't sing well. I don't have a good singing voice. So I'm never gonna sing. It's not like one of those things. Like, it's one of those things that we can get better at.
Yeah.
But there's just so much. I think there's just a lot of kind of misconceptions. Like you talked about it a little bit earlier, just about misconceptions that people had about, a certain belief system or whatever, which is why it's so important for us to have those conversations with people so we actually get to hear it. Like, I know when I was on my journey, after I was done being arrogant and I actually wanted to learn about people, I was shocked at some of the things that I learned about other belief systems. Because I had this picture in my mind about who they were and what they believed and everything else. And really what it was is my mindset was, well, I can't engage in any of that because then what if my mind gets changed or whatever? And it's like, well, hold on a second. Like, I know who Jesus is. There's nothing's going to change that.
Yeah.
Like, nothing's going to change how much he loves me and whatever. So why would I not want to understand more, where I could understand people more and engage them in conversation? Going back to Paul, like, I can hang with you, I can talk with you because I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I think people with their daily lives, right? Their beliefs are going to guide their daily lives, and we can learn a lot from people from other religions based on their daily lives. The Muslim faith prays 5 times a day. Do Christians pray 5 times a day? I hope so. I don't know.
I would be interested to know that.
And I'll be honest, you know what I've done? Just a little food for thought, because I wasn't. I have 5 alarms that go on my cell phone every 2 hours, and each one has a little scripture. And it just refocuses my mind on 5, so that I'm learning scripture, and I'm rechanneling my mind back to God, because they stop and they pray. And I think that's fantastic. Like, I think that's something we can learn from another religion, because, it's not part of our mandatory tradition like it is their faith. But it's great. Talk to God daily. Talk to God throughout your day, right? I mean, that's what Jesus says, talk to him constantly, right?
Well, and that's the thing we forget sometimes too. And I mean, we're not talking about this right now, but like, we in American culture we've created a box for God to live in. Yep. And like, we go visit him on Sunday in the box, and then we leave the box, and then we hang out and do whatever we want during the week, and then we come back on Sunday to visit the box again where God's at. Not realizing, like, God is with us always. God is with us when we're doing things that we should be doing. God is with us when we're doing things that we should not be doing. And because it's a relationship. It's not, just because my wife and I are in the same room doesn't mean we're not married. It doesn't change the relationship with that. But I think that sometimes we get that like compartmentalized view of what it looks like. And when we do that too, we impose that on people in other belief systems, right? Because we take our lens and we say, well, that's how other people do it too. Like, oh, well, you're, or you're, sometimes people are like, whoa, like you're like way over the top with this stuff or whatever. And it's like, no, actually, this is like how my relationship
The
was.
standard, yeah.
And a question that I would ask too is, what do other belief systems out there say about loving others? Maybe they are all supporting the same concept, right? We need to know a little bit about their belief system, right? We can't just assume.
Sure.
There are some belief systems out there that say you can earn your way into heaven by doing good things, right?
Right.
Not saying that that's what Christians believe, but they're still doing good works. Let's appreciate the fact that they're doing
Yep.
something good. They're living their lives trying to do good. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Right.
It doesn't guarantee you eternity like we believe, but it's a good way of life. And I think sometimes that's could be a tool that we could talk about, is acceptance of the positives that are coming out of
Sure.
other belief systems.
Absolutely.
Recognition and acceptance too.
Yeah.
Like because we have to look for them, right? If we're gonna like encourage it and acknowledge, like we have to acknowledge that they're there too. And so often, from religious standpoints, it's we throw away all of it. Well, you don't believe the same thing I do, so everything you believe is wrong. Not necessarily.
Right.
I wrote a paper in college. I took a class called Christendom and Islam. The professor didn't know what she was doing, and she told us that much herself, which was a lot of fun. But as part of that class, we had to read sections of the Quran. And at first, I think a pre-16-year-old Sarah would have taken a similar approach of, oh, I don't want to read this. And I think there is a lot of that fear of like, oh, I don't want to read that sacred text because I don't know. But by the time I got to that class, I was like, yeah, like I'm reading it because I want to know. I want to know what's in there. I want to know what it says. What's so interesting is that the paper that I wrote actually, argued that Christians should read the Quran because there were elements of it that strengthened my faith. In that there are a lot of the stories of Jesus and some of the other stories that I've grown up hearing worded just differently enough. Where it's like when your mom says something to you 100 times and then someone else says it and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's happened.
And then your mom looks at you like, I've been saying that to you for like 10 years.
Exactly. And it felt like that. And that kind of, speaking of that as well, recognizing and accepting that, yeah, they're going back to that concept. If it is true, it is from God, no matter where it's found.
Well, and if you think about it, right, all things will glorify God in the end, right?
Yeah.
Or bring God glory. That doesn't mean that everything we do, good and bad stuff, is glorifying to God.
Right.
However, it does mean that His glory will ultimately shine through in those things.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like it actually is a little bit more of a general thought to what Sam was saying and then kind of more specific to what you were saying, but I almost think that, and I don't think this is a tool, but maybe just more of like a way to do it is finding God in what that person believes,
Yeah.
right? Because I do it all the time with like movies and music and stuff where it's like I'll hear a song and I'm like, oh man, they're like talking about God, they don't even know it. Or like I'll watch a movie and I'm like, oh yeah, like, oh my gosh, like this person is looking for something. What they're looking for is a relationship with Christ, even though they don't know that, right? Like, so start to look for God in those things because does that mean that I have to accept and agree with the totality of another belief system? Absolutely not. Does that mean that I have to adopt the beliefs of another belief system? Absolutely not. But that does mean that I can appreciate where you can see another belief system acknowledging God or like, connecting people to God, even if it's, and I know that there's like, because then there's the religions that are like, well, or the belief system's like, well, everybody's right. It's like, well, I'm not going to go that far, but I will say that there are things you can pull from. Like I remember, I took, I think it was was it my humanities or world religion? I don't know. I took it at, college here in the area. And I remember they brought up this idea that there are Buddhist Christians. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because there are people that believe in Buddhism as Buddha as a deity, But then there's also people that just believe in the philosophy of Buddha, which, like you were talking about, Sam, is I'm going to treat people well. I'm going to respect my environment and whatever. Like, and I was like, oh my gosh, like you could overlay the philosophical piece of it with the scriptural base of the Bible, and it doesn't contradict, right? As long as I'm worshiping God as the Father of the universe and the Creator of the universe, and His Son died for me on the cross and whatever, those other like things that can come alongside it is not. It's not a non-starter, I guess, if you want to say that. Now, that's a whole other episode we get into as well. But I'm just saying that, I think so often we automatically assume that when somebody believes something that we do, that the totality of what they believe is wrong, and I want nothing to do with it or them.
Well, and I think the challenge here too with loving others, right, is you're going to have conversations with people, and based on your belief system what is truth, and in their belief system they believe it's true, right? So it's not your job. Obviously, it's our job as Christians to hopefully bring more people to Christ, right? That's part of our job. But God will change their heart. It's not our job to change their heart. All we can do is provide opportunities, right?
Right, and present the gospel to them.
Right.
Like, I understand that's what you believe,
Yeah.
but let me tell you what I believe, and let me tell you why I believe it. And then we talk to them about the gospel. Now, is that the first conversation we have? Probably not.
No.
Right? And I think, and once again, it's about where's our heart position in that. Is my heart position, I'm right and you're wrong, and I can't wait to tell you how wrong you are and how right I am.
Because that's what Jesus did all the
Right?
time.
And maybe one day when you come to your senses, we can have a talk about
Right.
like what the right thing is. Like, it's not that. It's that whole idea of just like I want it. But the way that people, I believe that one of the main ways that people come into Christianity is they see Christ in us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, 100%.
Like that is going to be infinitely more effective than, well, the book that I read disagrees with the book that you read.
Right.
So, don't know what to tell you.
And I think that has been one of the biggest challenges of this living out love is making sure we're living by loving others so that people do want to be in the group, right? Like a lot of people think, God wants us to be Christians because He needs us to follow Christ. Of course, that's part of it. But the real thing is He wants the non-believer to see what kind of love and say, I want what they have. I want to be part of that loving group. These people truly love each other and they love God. That might bring a non-believer more, like you said, that's a more powerful testimony, right? Because it's an example. They're watching it,
Yeah.
right?
Sometimes I think the best evangelism we can do is just not being a jerk. I was talking to someone this weekend about situations in which you come across people that are different than you. And I'm like, honestly, my concern isn't even necessarily like, hey, do you know Jesus? My concern is, I'm a Christian, and maybe I'm the first Christian that hasn't been a complete and total jerk to you. And I'm happy with that. Like, if the only thing you take away is, I knew a Christian one time who was kind to me, who wasn't a complete and total, only one, maybe, but I knew one that wasn't a complete and total jerk. Because that's, again, we're talking about the way of Christ and the love of Christ. He encounters these people that think and believe differently than him, and he's not like, hey, have you heard about me?
Yeah.
I'm pretty great. There's a kindness to him. There's a gentleness that people walked away from saying, hey, I wanted to encounter that again.
Well, and also what he was teaching was so radical compared to what it was because like they, we talked about not using the word religion, and part of it was because what they were living before Christ was religion because it was the structure, it was the process of being a follower of God, and it was the do's and don'ts, the rules and the whatever, and that is not a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
Like that's not, Jesus doesn't call us to live out the rules. Like Jesus calls us to emulate him in all that he does. Like, and what I love too is so we want to be an example of Christ to others. Jesus says, "Follow me." And I heard a preacher say this, and I loved it. It was, when Jesus says, "Follow me," it's not this like ambiguous journey, like walking in random places, right? The destination is love. Like, he is leading us to love him, to love each other, to love ourselves. It is to genuinely like know the value that we have, right? Like, I think that that's one of the words we can put in when we talk about loving people, is like understanding their value, right? And I think that's where we've come off track.
Absolutely.
We come off track because we forget that people have value, and all of a sudden their value is brought down to a term about who they are or about what they believe. And like, no, your value isn't. That's not what your value is. Like, your value is in the fact that like God wove you together in your mother's womb, just like me. Like, just like anybody else, just like any other Christ follower, God wove all of us together in our mother's wombs. Like, he put just as much love and care and intentionality into people that don't even believe in him or acknowledge him. So when we talk about like, when we talk about loving people, especially in this context, we have to like see the value in who they are as people, not just as well, you're the mission. And so the destination that you better come with me with is acceptance, because otherwise this is a waste of my time.
Yeah. One of the things we had talked about earlier was how I taught the kids in chapel the Latin words, the Imago Dei, but I think what's even more important and relevant is that was the chapel. The theme that I was given was respect. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what to do with it, and I finally just landed on the creation story. That we as humans, as mankind, are made in the image of God. God breathes his life into us. And because we are made in the image of God, we are deserving of respect. And that is true for every single person that has ever walked this earth. It doesn't matter what they believe. It doesn't matter where they've grown up, how they choose to worship. They are made in the image of God, and they deserve our respect in the way we engage with them, regardless of what their belief process may be,
or what they look like, or what culture they're from,
right,
or like it's wild when you think about that, right? It's not me, singular me, is made in the image of God. We are made in the image of God.
Yeah.
Which it's like, oh gosh, like.
Yeah. There was a pastor who often said that you have never locked eyes with someone who is not deeply and intimately loved by God. And that just, I mean, the first time I heard that, it completely floored me, because it reframes that for you, right? Yep. Every single person that you've ever locked eyes with, and every single person that you haven't, is deeply and intimately loved by God. And that has to change the way we engage with people when we think about that and when we keep that in mind.
Well, and even coming out of politics and into belief systems and stuff, that's got to kind of be the heart of it, right? That whole idea of like, my first thing I do when I come in contact with somebody that I don't know should be, wow, you are made in the image, like God loves you personally. Like, so I think is John chapter 18, is that the prayer where Jesus does the prayer to God? Is that John 18? I want to say it's John 18. I don't know. I think it's 18. I'm
really notorious for, it's somewhere in one of those books.
I think it's John 18.
Okay.
So anyway, he does this really amazing prayer. And like, I thought about it one day and it was like, man, like when Jesus died on the cross, it wasn't that like Jesus died for us. Like, he died for like me, like as a person, like as a person that didn't even exist yet. Like, but he saw my face. He knew my name, like personally. Like, it wasn't just I'm just everybody out here. I'm going to kind of do this thing for everybody out here. It's like, nope, I'm doing it for you because I love you as much as I love him and her and, whatever, which I just think is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you guys have made a bunch of great points about how we can navigate this loving people who think differently and have different belief systems. For one thing that I love that you said is if we can really just stop focusing on their belief system and focus on them as a child of God.
Yes.
That right away. We'll get rid of the barriers,
Right off the bat,
the
right?
prejudice, the stereotype, well, they think this. We really don't know anything about that person. We're just
Right,
we're
'cause
assuming
when-
because they believe in certain belief system
Right.
that they. But those are assumptions that we should not make,
Because
right?
we even think Christian, we have 3 different people right here of what it looks like to be a Christian.
Sure.
So surely we can't say, oh,
And-
because you're Jewish, you think this way.
And I think the other
There's
thing is
nuance.
that I've kind of absorbed from both of you is what looking at them as a child of God, and then the second one was learning to appreciate the positives that they are practicing in their belief system, because
What does
there
they
are
bring to the
positives.
table that does honor God?
Yeah.
Right, because it's going to honor God, exactly. So I think those two are really good, tangible things that you can take with you as you encounter people that think differently and have a different belief system.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything else? What do you think?
No, I mean, it's, it's funny because I think so much of what we talked about here is going to end up, it's going to continue to kind of be a thread that goes through a lot of it, talk about valuing people and, understanding that they're, children of God just like we are. I mean, like, that's what it's about, right? And then
Absolutely.
that changes so much. It really does. And, we need to be the ones setting the example. And I don't mean we in this room, we do, but Christ followers, we should be the ones that are that are setting the example. Like, we should be the ones that, people come and go, man, it's easy to talk to you about this stuff. This is something that's personal to me. I thought we would disagree, but it's good to talk to you about this. Because that is how we get to show the love of Christ to other people. And listen, we talked about belief systems, but, one of the things that, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit, was this idea that, what about people that believe just like us, right? So we're all Christ followers here, right? So what does it mean when all of a sudden, well, I'm a Methodist and you're a Presbyterian, or, well, I'm non-denominational. Okay, well, I'm Episcopalian, or I'm Catholic, and all the different things, the core of what we believe is pretty much the same, right? But how it manifests itself is very different.
Absolutely.
So actually, next time, that's what we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely. That should be a fun one.
It should be. Probably not as fun as the politics one, though. That one was pretty exciting.
I don't know.
But yeah, so listen, Sam, thanks, man. I appreciate your questions tonight. I actually kind of thought about some things that I hadn't really thought about before with that. So even here as we're talking, I was like, man, I never even considered that. And so thank you for those, and I'm excited for the next one.
Yeah, and thank you for tuning in, and wherever you're consuming this content, make sure you comment. Yeah, we'd love for you to subscribe, follow us, check it out. We really want your input too, and we hope that you're learning to live out love as we're all trying to learn together too. So until next time, thank you.
LOL Podcast, signing out.
Bye.